Welcome everybody to our next session. This is a practical plus also a bit of a discussion, sort of a workshop on how to be scholars in a digital age, and it's going to be sort of an interview style setup for the first 20 minutes or so, and then we can open it up to questions from the floor. Let's just sort of start maybe with Kirsty, if you can hear me. I was just wondering if you could recount some of your experiences of being an active sort of scholar on digital media and also your engagement with the media in terms of how you've built up your profile online as an academic and as a professional, and how you established yourself as a critic.
Thank you, Celia. First of all, I think that there was an initial reluctance by a lot of scholars actually to join Twitter. And I have to say that as I have developed my profile on Twitter, I find it to be an extremely useful platform for connection. I think what is important for academics to do, but I think so, especially in my field, which of course is celebrity studies, is to literally bridge that gap. And doing that via Twitter has been absolutely fundamental to so many connections that I made over the last couple of years. I also think in terms of participating in writing in areas or on platforms that are aimed at a general audience. So I don't know if you've heard of the conversation, but I've written for the conversation several times, and it's got my work out. I've been, most recently I had about 36,000 reads on the I wrote. It's a useful way of kind of putting out through the conversation. Those have been extremely useful platforms, and I'm sure many people are familiar with the conversation.
Okay, so you were cutting out just a little bit before, but I think the general gist is, you were using the conversation as a very good platform to get your ideas out there and to start establishing yourself, as a scholar and as a critic in the field. David, is that a platform you use quite often as well, or do you prefer?
Yeah, I think Twitter has actually moved over time to be much more a kind of a commentary location, much better than some of the other sort of social media platforms for academics. I genuinely think that makes more sense than some of the other platforms. Who knows, as it apparently is in decline, whether it will maintain that status. And the other thing is that other aspects of social media will kick in or have certain value for certain people. But I found one of the things that has helped me is with those sorts of things is to kind of limit where I put my energy. So I kind of make sure that in the online space I don't do a lot of other kinds of social media. So there's no real Facebook. I mean, you could probably find something about me on Facebook, but I don't play in that space. So I could imagine academics doing quite well on Instagram, but it's probably not going to be me, because all I do is do background images for Prezi, and that's about all the photo work that I do. But it might suit someone else, and I could see how different platforms would connect to a different trajectory for an academic, depending on your own predispositions. Like Kirsty, the conversation, which has moved from its original start in Australia to Britain, and has made connections to about 4 universities right around, I think around Boston, I think, in the United States, is a really, really interesting model, because it reverses the relationship between the academic and the journalist. I don't know how well you know the conversation, but basically what happens is you are the writer as an academic. The journalist is a heavy editor if you want them to be, but you can also reject their edits as well and say, no, I'm not going to accept that version. I'm going to go to this earlier version of what I've done. I've never done that because I think they're actually really good at simplifying the way I speak and write. Can't say that I use the subclause and complicated sentences. I don't think I do that, but apparently I do in the popular world. Speak a little bit too, loquaciously. There, an example of speaking, strangely. what that means is that the conversation is a conversion technique that's amazing, because you get most of what you want to say directly there in an article. It's encouraged in different universities. Kirsty's effect is much bigger than mine. I can't remember what my totals are. I've written about 5, and as I try ideas out, I actually try them. I used to try them a lot more in the conversation about 3 years ago than I have now, and that's partly just getting too busy and just the weight of writing. Second thing is I feel as if journalists seem to get a hold of me through online platforms, but that seems to be much more the way that I'm contacted than me actively creating a kind of profile itself. So it's good to have things available, I think, for journalists to play around with before they contact you. And that is, for me, the online dimension. So they have enough, they can see a CV, they can read a bit of a blog, they don't get overwhelmed by it, and they can then see how those connect and how that connects to their article. So yeah, that happens pretty regularly for me, that I'll get contacted by news media, but it comes from possibly Twitter, but possibly just searches on your university website and moving through that way as well. So make sure you have pathways that get where you want your connections that you don't know are going to move into material that you find interesting. So always sort of manage that in a way.
Yes, Kirsty.
Yeah, I absolutely agree about the pathways, because all of my media appearances have been actually because journalists contacted me through Twitter, which I also have on my profile a link to my WordPress. Got a much more in-depth version of the work that I've done, so I tend to find that's been where I've had the connections arise from. Also, I think I've had recently some media training, which was fascinating to see how what the media are looking for, and how it's really, of course, very, very key for us to distill our ideas. So I recently did a BBC Breakfast News live appearance, which was about why so many celebrities have died in 2016, which of course is a kind of a ridiculous topic in a way, because it's just life and death. But the interesting about that was the fact that my media training came in extremely handy, because I knew exactly the kinds of, well, first of all, the limited time I had to get across like ideas, and to be able to deliver them in such a way that was, would work for a breakfast audience at, 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning.
Well, that was actually my next question, was do you find a difference in how you have to engage with the reporter or the media or the interviewer across television or print mediums? Do you find yourself trying to self-edit or condense what you say when you're appearing live?
Yeah, absolutely. And the media training that I had very recently was with, there was a broadcast journalist there was the Daily Mail newspaper in the UK, which was interesting. And there was somebody from radio as well, and we had to do 3 different versions of our talks, basically, and it was really interesting to see what they were looking for and how different the approaches were. So you have to self-edit, you have to be very, very clear, because I know a lot of my colleagues are very reluctant actually to engage with media, fear of their words being twisted. Or I'm less like that. I think we should engage. I think it's really important to try and get our points across. As David said, we often speak in ways that are not easy for a general public to understand those ideas. I think it's really important that we engage. I think it's fundamental to academia in the 21st century, frankly.
Yes, I think that fear of maybe being misquoted or being misunderstood is quite prevalent for a lot of academics.
Yeah, so I used to, and I still do it as a kind of hierarchy. I've always found radio the best. Interestingly, print the worst, and maybe, even if it is still print or the press, and television somewhere in between. And part of that is the direct quotation quality. So whenever I've done something that relates to print, I might talk to a journalist for 45 minutes maybe even longer. And I know that they're going to use about 18 words. And so and I'm not good at it, but one of the strategies is repetition. If you watch how a politician does those things, it's awful. But if you are trying to get one point across, you got to keep it on point. And some people are better than that at others. I get intrigued by the new idea, and then I go off in a different direction. But I've always found that amazingly, I suppose it's like podcasts as well. You feel as if your academic identity is real when you're on radio, and when you're on television, you do feel highly constructed and situated, but slightly more in control because it isn't always, but it's vaguely live. And in that way, you're trying to distill what you're trying to do, and at least you're going to get that there. You could blow it, but it's at least you blowing it as opposed to the journalist sort of blowing what it's about. Now that identifies that difference in purpose. The journalist has kind of one objective, and they are always writing a story from an angle. But I'm always amazed at how their angle shifts when they talk to an academic. Me. No. But I'm always amazed at how much they sort of say, oh, that's interesting. But it doesn't necessarily come out in the article that they're writing. And they'll contact you again. And you'll be on their little list of, I've got this thing, I'm thinking about it, I haven't really thought about it. You actually you may not even be quoted in it, but they start using you differently as a kind of sounding board. And I've had that happen a fair bit as well. So it's an interesting, spectrum of relationships to the media that develop. But it is worthwhile. I think it is massively worthwhile for any scholar to engage in that. It's also kind of part of our role, our teaching identity, I think, in a way. And having said that, we also have to recognize that some of our academic colleagues, none in the room, of course, are really bad at it and should pass to other people for these things.
I remember the first time I was interviewed. It was an interesting sort of dynamic because the reporter was wanting to check that she had reported what I was saying correctly, and the sort of powers that be in the university, or the marketing team in the university was also quite keen that the university was represented properly as well. So there was an interesting sort of a meeting of purposes there.
Yeah, and there's that pass on. I don't know if you have that, Kirsty, but others might have it too, where the media and PR thing of a university says, we've got these journalists looking for someone to talk about this story. That happens a lot. So the one that I remember most was about Rolf Harris. Does anyone know Rolf Harris? The Brits might.
Australians and Brits will know. Yeah.
But he actually probably was more famous in Britain, but because of that became famous back in Australia. He was a kind of Australian icon, but then he played with children inappropriately. So sort of a bit like the Savile story. So it's a terrible, terrible story. And you have to make a decision about, do you jump in there? Are you ready to talk about those things? So always, it's easy to take on all sorts of potential media things because of the nature of what we deal with. But the caution is, be ready. Do some background research before you go on. Be aware, give yourselves, don't immediately do an interview, sometimes delay 2 hours so you can do the background research exactly what the journalist is doing, and then you can add something of value to the process. And my biggest mistakes usually are when I say, yep, okay, and then you say, literally, I don't know anything about this. And yeah.
Completely agree. And I think talking to on the media training that I had recently, everybody who was the representative of the media were there was saying, you know what, we will hang on for 2 hours for you. We will do that. It's okay to say, I'll get back to you in a couple of hours, rather than just, because I've done that before where I've gone, yeah, okay, I'll speak about David Bowie dying or whatever, and done an interview immediately, and then thought, actually, I could have been better prepared for that. So yeah, and I think that's really important that, they will wait. We don't have to be desperate to speak to them immediately. You do your research, think about it, and then respond, rather than a kind of knee-jerk reaction, I'm going to be on TV, and then they go and, I'm going to be on the radio, and I'll say yes immediately, and without actually fully preparing. So yeah, absolutely, I understand what you're saying, David. It's happened.
Yeah, and one other thing that it was probably from what Kirsty said earlier, one of the things that is really strange for an academic is, and I have this all the time, I'll have written something 20 years ago, but that is the one that the journalist sort of picks up or something like that. One of the things that you should, as a strategy, is work out ways in which things that you're dealing with right now, you have a pathway to get some of those ideas out in a popular way. And that's hard work, but by the time it comes out in a journal or a book, it's a bit like, where were we discussing that? I'm not sure who we were discussing it with. Was that us?
Yeah. It was
where it was,
yeah.
It's a bit like an actor basically spruiking a movie that they were involved in and trying to come up with funny stories and stuff that they were involved in 8 months ago, 10 months ago, because it's just being released. And in a way, you're in the same situation as an academic. Your stuff is not on time. So like with Ron's one, specifically on target with the Trump hashtag, if you want to call it that, of how this idea of the victim has had this long trajectory and has all sorts of things that are there. Perfectly nice sort of thing that you can do right now. Really interesting trajectories around it. And that's what you have to think about. What's going to be valuable for you is sometimes doing your journalistic or popular things as your story, as your articles are being written, rather than when they come out later. Let that come back from the journalists when they've seen these things out there. Anyway, that's a bit of advice.
It's almost like trying to remember what thought processes you were going through when you were writing that book. And
that was the old David.
Yeah.
I'm thinking differently now.
I'm a different scholar now. Kirsty, did you want to add something to that?
No, I'm just agreeing with David's perspective there, absolutely.
Mm.
Well, talking about sort of time lapsing and shifts in your persona, I suppose, or who you are as a scholar, I'm wondering if you could, maybe I'll start with you, David, and then move to you, Kirsty, talk a little bit about maybe balancing, this has to do with the persona work you're doing, balancing the scholar's persona with other personas they may have, or the institution's expectations of what the scholar's persona should be or may be, with your own sort of intentions for what you want to scope of yourself. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, and Kim, my colleague I sometimes publish with, we have perspectives on this that kind of sometimes match up. But I think we're all always dealing with a combination of who we are. Mm-hmm. And some of that is what's going to be valuable to reveal about ourselves outside of or even inside our institution. You can have incredibly bad experiences by being tweeting on something and getting really rabid about something if your university's following everything that relates to your university online. It's a scary phenomenon about what they're looking for to protect their public identity, their brand. And that happens. And I'm not going to go into great details, but it does happen a fair bit that you hear about someone contacting someone who has tweeted something, they've sworn, or they've said something a little derogatory about their institution. So you have to kind of manage that sort of thing, and also how much you reveal about yourself. So, and what you're comfortable about that. And in a field like this area, this discipline, sub-discipline, whatever you want to call it, of celebrity, it is all about the relationship between the public and the private. And what, as you were describing earlier, that notion of authenticity and authenticating means eliminating layers and layers of identity. But we use those layers of identity to negotiate our way through lives. So we have to be aware of how deep we want our private identity to go public. And we have to manage that in all sorts of ways. And it is as important to a early career scholar as it is to someone who's aging gracelessly right before you. You have to think about what you really want out there, because as one of our conversations earlier, it's there forever. Those whatever you post can come back in all sorts of different ways. Again, it's not, you shouldn't stop yourself, but it's also realizing what you're going to be comfortable with. So I guess I do that. I don't generally talk about what I have for dinner or other sorts of things like that. But other people really find that useful, because that's the stimulus for them to get into other political and cultural and scholarly ways of dealing with things. So you have to read it and filter.
Kirsty, do you find that balancing your sort of personal and your scholarly, or the institution's expectation of your scholarly persona to be
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that also Facebook in particular at the moment, I know a lot of academics have a Facebook as an academic and have their private Facebook. I've noticed a trend really in the last maybe couple of years where a lot more academics are using Facebook as they just ideas rather than just post what they're having for dinner. So it seems that that's kind of becoming quite an interesting space actually for a lot of academic debate and promotion of people's work. So yeah, I think it's very you have to be very careful, and I think most people, certainly in my institution, if they have so they will say, I have a disclaimer, use my own, rather than that of the institution. So I think that's just a kind of capitalism that most people use. And I also find that mine, because I have, because of my partner's job, who works in the entertainment industry, I have access to a lot of celebrities, and when they ask me what I do, and I say I'm a scholar, it's a sort of immediate reaction, oh, you're a journalist, oh, I better not talk to you then. So I'm in a really interesting space that I can kind of dip into the real world of kind of celebrity and personally get as an academic. So it's a very interesting space to be in, and so it's I have to be quite careful to negotiate the kind of layers of my kind of persona and scholarly identity there.
Yeah, so you're wearing different hats often at the same time.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.